Welcome back to Real Wealth Podcast, sponsored by Leading Edge Financial Planning. I am here with Mr. David Case and Mr. Honorable. We got to stick with Mr. today?
No, Mr.
Mr. Eric Melgren, because we're in my chambers, not his.
Exactly.
Okay. So we're on here today to talk about something very special, your friendship and your guys' journey over time and living the best life possible and how you guys got to know each other. So just to give a little bit of background, I've had the pleasure of knowing David Case and Eric Melgren as friends. I met David after I met Eric. Eric, we've known each other about 8 years now.
Probably at least.
At least that. And David and Eric were each other's best men in each other's weddings. You were, I'm going to mess this up a little bit, class presidents or
student body presidents.
Student body president, one after the other.
In successive years at Wichita State.
Successive. Which years again?
I was 79, 80.
So I was 78, 79.
Right.
And I hope that's right.
I think that's right.
Okay. And that's how you met. You were there first and David came in. You guys met each other in passing and you're like, hey, we should be friends.
We didn't meet through student government.
Oh, okay. How did you meet?
Actually, he knocked on my door. It was, there's a group called InterVarsity Christian Fellowship that he was a part of, and he had gotten my name as being potentially interested in a Bible study, and so he was following that up and knocked on my door and said, "Hi, I'm Eric Melgren," and that's how it started.
Awesome. And so I've had the pleasure of knowing both of you over the last several years and learning things from you, experiencing what, frankly, a great friendship is like and being able to watch that between the two of you. Now, Eric's a federal judge here in town, and David runs a recovery clinic and a podcast up in McPherson, Kansas. Effective Heart Change is the podcast, and we'll provide a link for that in the show notes. And also runs
Live Free Ministries.
And anyways, so I'm excited to talk more about the background and what all played into this with you guys today. So you guys met each other at Wichita State, and how have you invested in your friendship over the years? Or why don't you guys just talk about some of the, big points of your friendship over the years?
Well, I think primarily we've invested in our friendship by spending a lot of time with each other. As David said, he was a freshman. He looked about 15. I was a junior, and I was co-leading basically a small group of Bible study with InterVarsity. And he was assigned to me, and I approached him, and he joined the group. And we just started spending time together. And I don't know, there was something, kind of a spark that I think, enjoyed each other and just sort of naturally grew from that.
It was interesting in my upbringing. I had been to church on a regular basis, but I really hadn't learned the Bible. So I sat down actually in a Bible study that he was leading and sat down in one of those studies, and it was kind of like I was in awe. It was like, wow, these people know so much more than I know. And it really impacted me. And so I kind of launched from there in terms of beginning to study the Bible and grow in my Christianity. And that was a huge catalyst. And he ended up being a mentor to me during those years. I didn't just look 15. I might have even acted 15. It's hard to say, but I really needed and was interested in having somebody in my life that really was several steps ahead of me in terms of Christianity and what he knew and how he was able to guide. And so that was a huge part of it, at least initially for me.
Is that before you started your writing career or ministry or pastoring?
That was long before. Okay. I actually, if you want a quick history, when I graduated with a degree in English, and I taught school first. Then I did ministry training. Then I went into pastoring. Actually, I went back and had some school teaching on top of that, and then pastoring, and then eventually into the drug alcohol ministry, where I took principles of faith and really began to apply them in a way to help people who are at very difficult points get life change.
Incredible. And how has that, having learned how to teach that and live that out and help others live that out, how has that impacted your relationships over the years?
It's interesting. I feel like he's gotten the worst end of the deal through the years. Number one, he had to mentor me early on, so he had to babysit the 15-year-old, if you will. But he had to work with me through those years. But really, as I started pastoring, it was a startup church. It was extremely difficult, dealt with a lot of problem situations. And so from that point on, I feel like I've kind of been the leech. I've been the one who showed up and said, help, I need a listening ear. I need somebody to come along. And it really has been in some ways, and I know it's not, but in some ways it's been very one-sided in that I feel like I'm the guy that shows up and says, I need an outlet. I need somebody outside of ministry. I need somebody that I can connect with. And so that part of it has been very special to me to have that through the years.
I would agree with part of that. Of course, we've always been somewhat of an outlet and connected, but I've never really felt like I was, as David put it, getting the short side of this. I've really valued our friendship over these many decades. Actually, we're quite old, and never felt like I was sort of just giving out and not getting something back. And an intriguing thing to me about our friendship is, so when I met him, when I knocked on his door, we were living in the same dorm. A year or so later, I graduated from college and moved to Topeka, and since then, we have never lived in the same town. For 40 years, we've lived in different towns. I was in Topeka and then Wichita. He was in Salina and then Dallas and then McPherson. But we've always spent lots of time together through all those years.
And part of that I would pick up and say it was intentional. Early on, the relationship started intentional, and I'm not quite sure from his point of view, he would have to talk about it, but there was a structure set up there for mentoring. And I think at least the first month or two, I don't, in terms of memory, that's a long time ago. I don't know how long it stayed that way, but early on, there was some time spent together around a discipleship mentoring format. And then from there, it grew into a friendship. I went out to his place, his family home, and visited out there. And it just started that back and forth relationship that we've maintained through all of the years.
It's kind of a funny story. We're both farm kids, except David grew up in a dairy farm, and I have no idea then or now how to milk a cow. Couldn't possibly get milk out of a cow. No clue. I grew up on a ranch, and so David came out and spent a weekend with me, and he'd never been on a horse. And so I put him on a horse, and it wasn't entirely successful. But
other than getting bucked off a couple of different times, and
a couple of different horses.
One of the times, the horse decided, okay, I'm not getting rid of this guy. So then decided to roll over. So I had to bail out.
So for both being farm kids, we were fish out of water in each other's settings, but there was sort of a thing we had in common that we didn't have in common as we started out.
It is kind of interesting in our farm setting that it was cows. I mean, it wasn't chickens, pigs, sheep, goats. It was cows. I mean, when you have a dairy farm, it's highly intense, early till late. And we didn't have reason for horses because the cows aren't out in pasture. They're in smaller holding pens. And so, yeah, I had never really been around horses to any great extent.
Today, you both deal with people in extreme situations at times. Still very different. Kind of like cows. It is. It's like cows and horses. We're dealing with people. He's dealing one side. I'm dealing with the other side. Uh-huh. In fact, it's not uncommon for me to end up in a courtroom with someone, speaking on behalf of someone. And it is interesting that I know a lot of the lingo. I know a lot of what's going to happen, how it's going to happen. I know more about court, not because I studied it, but because I lived through it from the other side with people who are going through court cases. I actually do know quite a bit about it.
And I've learned quite a bit about addictive behavior because so many of the people that come in my court for sentencing and then for supervision after their sentence are people who are struggling with some form of addiction, usually substance addiction of one type or another. And so I've learned a lot about that. So we have kind of gotten a shirt-tail education in each other's profession.
Yeah, and I love your podcast. I listen every week that it comes on, and I learned a lot from it. It's always so interesting to listen into your topics, and I hope that whoever hears this takes a chance to check it out and learn more about depths of a relationship and all that. How have you seen you guys? Okay, so for David, it's been picking Eric's brain. For Eric, it sounds like more time has been important as far as you've seen it.
Yeah, as we were talking about this session coming up, David started using the word mentoring, that I'd kind of been a mentor to him, and I have really no recollection of that at all. I mean, I understand that early on I was leading a group that he was in, but in very short order, I just considered him a close friend. In fact, I've introduced him a few times, and I've said I met him in 1977, and every year since then, I've called him one of my best friends. So, and he talked about me being a mentor to him. That was sort of a foreign concept, not a memory I really had. I've just seen us from very early on as being close friends who are doing life together.
Well, it's interesting because it wasn't just on the Bible study side, then it was also on the political side, if you will, in the student government. I followed his path and lead and had been a part of working with him in the student government side, and then followed that. And you actually did walk me through a lot of the ropes there in terms of, okay, this is what's going on, et cetera. And I would have to agree, it didn't feel like a mentoring in that, okay, here is the grand wizard who is explaining everything to me, and I don't know anything, and so please, sir, would you help me with some information? Here, it didn't feel like that at all. It was more like a friendship, and we were just walking through things together. But it is interesting in both of the key pieces that we had early on. In a sense, he preceded me and made a way for me, so to speak. But I would absolutely have to agree, as the years have gone on, he's become very much just a listener in my world. And I don't want to say just, because we interact way beyond that. But if I was to characterize the relationship, I'm the one that tends to come and dump stuff more, and he tends to be more listener. I think that's been a more consistent activity. And so in many ways, when you look at that, he has maintained that kind of posture with me, more of a mentoring posture, but yet I would also agree with him. I don't feel like I'm coming and saying, would you please straighten me out, and et cetera. It's not like that at all. It has been really from the beginning very much a friendship.
And early on, David's gifted spiritually. I mean, he really has, and you know this, Michael, David really has giftedness from God in terms of understanding what makes people tick and what their spiritual struggles and barriers are. And as I think you noted, he's written a lot of books, he's done a lot of seminars. And so early on, I started absorbing some of that stuff from him. And so very quickly on, I felt like I was learning a lot spiritually from the insights and the giftedness that David's acquired, been given.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have too. I've benefited from that, and I've experienced the level of, your giftedness, especially that's developed with your ministry over the years, between helping with the spiritual and emotional levels of healing, which it's very rare.
It's interesting because so often spirituality, or let me change it, I'm going to say even religiosity or the church or whatever, ends up being divorced from normal life. And that's part of why we call it effective heart change. I really want to take that next step and get it to the application level. I just believe that I should be, people walking with God should be, people who understand the scriptures should be some of the most effective, some of the most powerful people in working with problems and difficult situations. And so much of the time we take that and we just refer that somewhere else. And that's part of why I got into the addiction recovery area. It's like, this shouldn't be. And so yes, being able to see people, and not just addicts. I mean, part of the reason I took that is, if you can handle this, you should be able to handle everything. And so it's, if you can handle the intense cases, the intense situations, then when other people come along, it's a lot of the same principles. It's a lot of the same applications, but just not at quite the same intensity level. So yes, my brain never stops. I'm continually looking at principles. How do you apply that? How do you apply that in a way to help people get better, to help them grow?
Your weekend retreats are intense.
I'm an intense person.
So the one thing that David Case does not do well is relax. We recently took a week vacation, just David and his wife and my wife and I, down to Branson. Got a place, just the four of us, had a relaxed schedule, kind of take things easy. He had his computer. He spent the whole time, not the whole time. We went on the boat and did some fun things, but lots of the time writing his next episode of things that comes. He's a very intense person. He's always moving, always churning. So very intellectually active. That's probably one of the things that attracted me to him to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
It was funny. While he was there, my wife, with a little help from them, enforced that I put my computer away, and I actually was a good boy. But then he had something that came up, so he had to leave like a day early. So at that point, I had 2 or 3 days that he wasn't there. So I didn't have anybody looking over my shoulder. And it's mostly self-imposed, but I was doing a curriculum manual last spring. So I had all of these pages that I wanted to produce, and you actually were interacting with me at that time and some of the material that I was writing. And I probably put in 40 plus hours writing yet that week.
It's kind of funny because we've traveled a lot together, and particularly back when I was U.S. attorney, I used to travel all over the country a lot, and David would go on a lot of trips with me. He's done that any number of times, several times to Washington or Kansas City. And the trick would be I'd go there for my meetings. He'd come with me. I'd be in meetings during the day, and he'd sit in the hotel room and write. And then in the evening, I'd come back, we'd have dinner together, we'd visit, we'd hang out, we'd enjoy each other. And then the next day, I'd go back to meetings, and he'd sit in the hotel room and write. So there's been a long history of this kind of interaction between the two of us.
It's neat for me to be able to carve out some of those times when you're in the kind of ministry that I am. And before, I actually was a Christian school principal along with pastoring. I mean, I've had intense jobs and doubled them up and et cetera. Well, how do you carve writing time out of that? My first book, Going Deeper, was basically written after I put the kids to bed, somewhere between 9 o'clock and 1 a.m. I mean, that was my writing time. Well, I'm not as young as I used to be. So that 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. doesn't work as well. I'm just not quite as sharp. So then I had to find other avenues, and he and I would go, and it really was fun because we would make the relationship work in that way, in a way that I loved it. I got some time that was carved out. I could be investing in some of those projects, and then we would have some time to hang out together.
One of the things I wanted to ask you both about, because you both have very interesting careers, very different paths, but think about big aha pivotal moments in your career. Like, what's maybe a big lesson that you learned as your career was developing, or you had a big course change of direction? And speak to that.
Well, we have had very different careers, and we kind of laugh about that occasionally, although we say one of the defining points of our friendship is that he's one of the few people who does not call me judge, and I'm one of the few people who does not call him pastor. But my career, I started out, went to law school, joined a large law firm, worked tons of hours, was there 15 years. Then, through a long story that I won't get into today, became the U.S. attorney for Kansas and did that for 7 years, and I'm on the bench. So a couple of defining points, I think. One is early on in my career at the law firm, I decided that I didn't want to work as many hours as a lot of my peers who were having very successful careers, and they're great people, but that's pretty much what they did. And I've always been kind of involved in the community and doing a lot of things. In fact, when David first formed Live Free Ministries, I incorporated it for him and was on the board for a number of years. So I wanted to have time to do that. And in making that decision, I decided I was going to be content and happy with making less money than my peers because I wanted to spend less time practicing law. It naturally followed. So I made that decision. I was allowed by the firm to kind of make that decision. And that was kind of an early balancing form for me. Another aha point would be when I like to joke that I went to bed one night as a tax lawyer and woke up the next morning as the top federal prosecutor in Kansas. And as I said, there's a long story to that, but the short version of it is God was making a lot of things happen that had gone to the point that it seemed impossible that they would happen, seemed unlikely that they were going to happen. He really sort of called me to do something that I thought was completely irrational and illogical. And he just made a way for that. So that was kind of a pivotal point in my career too, to recognize even in the secular work, and you can't get much more secular than being a lawyer, can you? That God was still involved in directing where I was going in unexpected ways that I look back on and I just marvel at.
Can you comment on some of the maybe road signs that led you to say, okay, this seems to be completely illogical, and yet I'm going to go ahead and move forward with it? Was it just doors were shutting and opening that didn't seem to make a lot of sense?
Well, I was, again, this is kind of a longer story than I'll get into, but I was being encouraged by a number of people in Washington. There was a new president, and I was being encouraged by a number of people in Washington to apply to be the United States Attorney for Kansas. And I told them all they were nuts. I was a tax lawyer. And finally, a friend of mine who worked in the White House Office of Political Affairs, who'd been nagging me to do this, called me. I was actually home sick in bed and said, Eric, have you prayed about this? And I said, okay, Matt, we're going to fight dirty, huh? Fine, I'll pray about it. And within 2 or 3 days, it was just clear to me. I mean, it was never logical, but it was just clear to me after I prayed about it, this is what God wanted me to do. And didn't make a lot of sense to me, but it had been made pretty abundant to me. That's where he was moving me. And flash forward 7 years, and I did want to move from that job into a federal judgeship, but the clock was running out. There was no time. My friend, the senator, told me that there was no chance, that the time had kind of passed. I wasn't going to get a hearing. I was convinced that was the case. And then again, in just an amazingly short span of time, God made things happen that seemed illogical. And there were several obstacles that came up during the way, and he just sort of moved right through them. So in both of those stories, although in different ways, one I was resisting the job, one I was pursuing it, but it looked like it was completely impossible. I just saw the hand of God directing my career. And so it's been kind of a lesson for me to stop planning. And I like to use the phrase, when I was growing up in the 70s, there was a phrase, God is my co-pilot. And I kind of like that. And then after a while, I thought, well, why is God the co-pilot? I should be the co-pilot. And then I thought, well, I should just crawl out of the co-pilot seat and crawl in the back seat and let him fly the plane. So I've kind of learned that process through what God's done with me, just in some unexpected ways.
Thanks for sharing.
I would have to say there really hasn't been a great grand design. A lot of times people say, how did you ever decide to start a drug alcohol program? And the answer that I always give, well, it was a God thing, because I don't have an addiction background. In fact, to this day, people look at me, how do you do this? How do you do what you do? How do you walk through? How did you establish credibility? Because it's not typical. It just isn't there. But almost every step along the way, it's been very organic. It's been very one step at a time, and getting to those points of needing to, quote unquote, obey God. The program especially was that. It was, just one thing after another started lining up and falling in place, and I was doing nothing to encourage it. I really wasn't pushing it. It was just happening. And at some point you look at this thing and you're like, if I don't do this, I'm being disobedient. So I really have had a sense of God leading all the way through. When I started pastoring, very much the same way. Many of these steps have really been ordered by God, and I don't know how else you say that. Obviously, I've pursued things. I've done training. I went to college. I've done different kinds of things that I pursued. But the biggest part of my life, I really do feel like has been ordered and directed, and I haven't chosen it, and I can't really claim the responsibility for it.
For the rest of us who don't live and breathe in Live Free Ministries and experience it on a day-to-day basis, could you do your best at explaining what it means to, sort that out with God, ask for direction? What does that look like? How can we grow that?
A lot of times people start with the big decisions. If you start with the big decisions, good luck. You'll be second guessing yourself. Everything will be difficult. You'll be wondering, how do I do this? Where do I go? And it really starts as simple as Colossians 3, where he talks about let the umpire, I love this language, let the umpire of peace abide in your heart, guide your way. And if you never, ever get to that place, how in the world can you know where to go from there? But if you walk this through, and that's another whole discussion, but so much of that is just getting to that place to where there is a peace from God. Romans 8 talks about the Abba Father experience, where you, in your prayer, you begin to connect with God, and you start having this thing going on inside of you that you're like, wait a minute, that's not me. That's not from me. So where did that come from? And of course, I'm a strong believer that it came from some place outside of me, which would be God. So I can have that experience of suddenly realizing, feeling, experiencing that I am a child of God. I can have that experience of peace. And then when I begin to submit things and surrender things to God, now I've got something that's not just me. It's not just my brain. There's actually a personal interaction with a God who is guiding and speaking. If you really want to make that thing stronger, you include the Word of God, because God's never going to lead you contrary to who He is and what He would ask for. And then you include people. I mean, that goes back to part of why we're here is this relationship. People who know you well, people who are willing to pray for you. You bring all of that into those kinds of decisions, and you listen to their counsel, and you start forming this into something where we call it a walk with God, where it's not just something that you grab out of the air, but you formulate over a period of time. And when you learn to walk that way on a daily basis, then when you hit the big decisions, it's not overwhelming.
Yeah. Staying on that a little bit, I want to shift over to a question I just have out of curiosity, because I know both you guys pretty well. And one of them is, how do you look at money? Because I think you both have a different paradigm on money as things go. But yeah, why don't you share a little bit about how you see that?
I'll start here because I should not be on this program. I mean, I am not a good example in a sense. I'll take it both ways. On the one hand, I do plan, I do budget, I do a lot of the things that you should do. But I'm also, I grew up, there were a couple of key family members, extended family members, that money became their God. And I saw that, and during my growing up years, I vowed that was never going to happen in my life. And I believe that I've followed that through to a great extent, to where I've been in that place of saying, no, money is not going to stop me, start me. I'm not going to live in that place. So going into ministry, God's kind of put me out on a limb. I tend to be one of these people who have pioneered ministries, and I've started new things. And just like when you're starting a business, it's not exactly fun. You go out there, and it's like sometimes you feel like the saw is behind you and you're cutting the limb off behind you, and you don't know quite how it's going to happen. So I've actually ended up living in a very strong faith position where I pray and I do what we talked about, and I get a strong sense that God says, I want you to do this. And I'm looking at Him going, God, where's the money? And sometimes the money isn't there. And He says, will you obey me? And then I will provide. That's what I'm talking about in terms of you're a financial planner. What I just described does not fit financial planning at all. Now, if you're going to do that, I would suggest you better have a good walk with God. You better have accountability people. You better not be sawing the limb off behind yourself and ready to fall, several stories into the concrete. And so I have boards. I have other people that pray with me. I don't just take these jumps as if they were just insane out of the window, hoping not to die when you go splat jump. But I include other people in those decisions. We pray about it. We get to a point of saying, we do believe this is God's will. And then I, because of the lifestyle, have story after story of God providing in unbelievable, miraculous ways.
Thanks for sharing. Because no, I can't advise clients around that or to do that. but I know that's where you lived for quite some time, and possibly even currently. But yeah, your faith around money is just amazing, and it's so neat to hear your stories.
And that's not something that you advise people to do.
No.
And I don't advise other people to do it. And when we're budgeting and within the organization itself, we have budgets. We do all of the principles, and that's the normal. But there are times when it's a ministry that we're meeting needs. We're touching the poor. We're touching all kinds of different people. And there's times when the need is just there, and God says go. And that's been my lifestyle. I've chosen to obey, and you better be solid if you're going to do that. That's not something you do flippantly.
Of course. Yeah, good disclaimer there. Okay. What do you think about money, Eric?
So I also was am in a what's considered a lucrative profession at a law school. Well, after a couple of years at a law school, I joined really an excellent firm, probably the largest law firm in the state. Was making good money, although as indicated earlier, I decided fairly early on that I wanted to make less money and have more time to do other things. And that wasn't particularly a sacrificial decision because I was still making a good living. About the time that maybe I would have really been rolling into mid-tier senior partner ranks is when I left the firm and went into government service. And again, I don't want to plead poverty. For a government employee, I've had a couple of fairly decent paying jobs. They're paying a lot less than I would have made at the firm, but I've not been motivated so much by money, and I've certainly not been motivated by lifestyle. We joke that when I was a first-year associate of the firm, we bought a house. I said, this is a nice house. We'll be here 5 to 7 years. I'll make partner. We'll move to a bigger house. That was 35 years ago. We still live in that house. Now, we're looking at this time to move, kind of a strange time in our life to be doing that, but we never moved out of that house. It was it's a great house. I like it, but kind of a modest house because we just weren't motivated by that. I've, rather than spending money on things, I've taken my family on trips. I've taken David on trips, as we've talked about, traveled a lot with friends and made memories more than possessions. That's I guess, been good. And then I'm at a stage in my life now where I spend a lot of time with young men and what I would call mentoring. As I said, I wasn't really sure I felt like a mentor to David, but I have done a lot of mentoring. And a lot of that involves breakfasts and lunches that I typically pay for. Mike, you and I had lunch today and you bought it. I was very grateful. Thank you for doing that very much.
You're welcome.
But that was very unusual. It's not 1 out of 10 meals that I have with somebody where I just assume that I'm paying, and that's fine because they're young people starting out on their careers. I can do this. I'm involved in leading a young men's group that meets on Friday morning, and my wife makes breakfast every morning for these 20 guys. And, over time that kind of, again, adds up, and that's kind of, we've chosen to spend our money. I could have made choices where I'd have had a lot more money, but I feel like God's blessed. I've been comfortable. We've been fine. That's just not been a focus of what I wanted to do. And so that's why I've looked at it. Obviously, David and I have had very different paths in that regard. But I think a common denominator for both of us is that we've seen people in our life, in our family, in our careers who have made money their God. And we've said, we're not going to do that. We're going to make other choices. We're going to pursue other things. And those have been different paths, but they've come kind of from that common point.
It's interesting. I talk from a ministry standpoint. So many of the people who come in broken and they look at it, and I know other ministries who have done similar things where they provide a jobs program and they make sure that, if you provide a jobs program, you're going to get your cut out of that, and et cetera. And the people a lot of times are really bitter because they're tired of being taken advantage of and being broken and being down. And one of the commitments that we have from the day that they walk in that place is, I'm going to be dad. We're going to provide for you. We're going to take care of you. So we're able to look at these individuals and say, we want you to be able to do what you need to do to get better. So we're looking at this where I don't want them to come in where money is absolutely dictating every decision, but I want them to be in a growth mode, et cetera. Well, then I have to be able to talk to donors. I have to be able to talk to different people, because if you're going to put that out as your philosophy, you better back it up with something. And as I've said, that's part of the stress that we face in terms of financial stress, but through prayer, through connecting with other people, through sharing, and again, developing budgets. We haven't done this foolishly. There have been a few decisions along the way that the financial guy would have said, why did you do that one? And God backed it up. Okay. So there have been a few of those decisions. But the thing that I really want to tag team on, and it's what he said, there's a philosophy there about making your life rich. And I believe that the way we have approached this and the attitude that we have had in ministry has helped make lives rich, because we've been there and we've been able, through donors and through different people, to be able to be that provider in a way that it really changed the lives of people.
And I've really approached a concept of making life rich, to pick up on David's statement, as being something that doesn't involve, with all due respect to our host, that doesn't involve the financial piece, but involves more the lifestyle piece. Years ago, I read a quote, I don't remember who said it, that if you've had one true friend in your life, you've had more than your share. So I've had way more than my share, starting with the guy sitting here on my left. But, even beyond that, because to me, I would say I've had a rich life, not because I have a lot of money in the bank and I'm fine financially, but because I've had a great deal of friends and a great deal of relationships and guys like you that I share a birthday with, Michael. That's just meant a lot to me, a lot more than, having $5 million in the bank would ever mean.
And when you really take on that, then I believe, verse that I love, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. When you get your priorities right and you've got quality relationships, everything starts falling in line. I mean, your long-term wealth actually starts to work. I mean, the ministry, it blows my mind where we're at financially now when you think about where we started and the number of people we're working with and providing for and all of that. When you handle your life well in Christ, God begins to bless this thing and it works in an amazing way. So finances are an incredibly important part of that, and keeping them in a healthy way where you develop, back to my language, you develop a rich life, not just a rich pocketbook. That's important. I couldn't provide for the people the way we do with the philosophy we have if we hadn't been in touch, if we hadn't used good principles, if we hadn't cultivated people to partner with us. None of that could happen without that. But it doesn't become our God. Our goal is really to walk this thing out in obedience to Christ in a way that changes lives.
Absolutely. One concept around money that I really appreciate is money is really a store of energy. And some people do store up a lot of it, and it passes on to somebody else when they pass away. But while we're here, we have a unique opportunity to use it for impact, influence, generosity, all kinds of things. But the life that we get from just storing it up, maybe it doesn't quite compare to using it to invest in other people's lives and bettering other people around us.
And I've appreciated that through the years. I've been the poverty brother, so to speak, of the two of us, and I don't want to exaggerate that. God's taken care of me. I've been fine. But it again, I can testify. Eric through the years said, "Hey, can we go on this trip?" And I would say, sometimes I would have honestly had to say, no, I can't go, and et cetera. But many times he was offering, "Hey, I'll take care of it. I'll pay for it." And at that point, just because he handled his finances well, he was able to do that. And that's such an important concept of just handling those finances well, storing that up, being ready to give away. Couldn't have happened if he hadn't handled his finances the way he had.
Absolutely. And that's some of the freedom that comes with it, is being able to do fun stuff like that. So I attend Pathway Church out in Goddard. They're going through a series right now, and it's the tagline is "Everyone walks with someone." Anyways, I was going to ask Eric specifically, because I know you do a lot of mentoring with the men's group. We meet, on the Friday morning. But who mentored you? I know you've had some mentors in your life. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
So I've been asked that by a lot of the young guys that I mentor, and the overarching answer is not much of anybody. So a year, or at least a semester, a little more than a semester in college, The faculty sponsor for University Christian Fellowship Chapter was an aeronautical engineering professor. He was in charge of the doctoral program of aeronautical engineering at Wichita State. I can't even spell aeronautical engineering, let alone have any idea what was done in a doctoral program. But he was a wonderful man of God, Glenn Zumwalt. We called him Dr. Z. And he spent some time just meeting with me. And I thought when we started this out that we were going to go through a book or a study or something. We really just kind of hung out and talked about life. That lasted for less than a year. I really came to a life of faith at the end of my sophomore year of high school. And there was an old farmer in town who took a bunch of us who had come to faith in Jesus at the same time, kind of under his wing, and spent a year or so with us, just kind of hosting us in his home and talking about things. Johnny Millett. Johnny was kind of a key role for me as a brand new Jesus follower. Would have been by then my junior year of high school. But other than that, I can't say that I had a lot of mentors, and that's something that I kind of missed, and that's something that probably in some way has fed into my desire to try to spend some time doing that with the next generation.
I would have to say I've lived with what I would call a series of mentors. Eric is one that got me started, but then on through college, and especially the first years after, it would be, a person here for a period of months a lot of times. And again, I'm pretty quick and et cetera. So what would happen sometimes is I would catch on to certain things, and next thing I know, I'd be jumping into my kind of gifting role, which is teaching. And as soon as you jump into that teaching role, it's almost like the relationships would flip. So I went through that a lot through my life. And what I ended up with much more were peer situations. I ended up with people who we'd sit down and we would earnestly seek together. And those ended up being incredibly powerful through the years. And I've had many of those. I've maintained those through most of my life. But I'm a little bit like Eric. If I look back, it's like, oh, wow, I've had this abiding mentor or that one. It's been more those relationships that were give and take, where we both had the same goals, and we invested at a level and really took off and went for it at that point.
Where you could build each other up.
Absolutely.
Like iron sharpening iron. It's a quote somewhere. Right?
Proverbs.
That would be true, yes.
Going to life hacks. What life hacks have you guys found over the years that make life better for you, help you enjoy, get the most out of life, live the best life possible with the short time that we do have here?
Well, anybody who knows me even slightly knows that I'm big on relationships. That's a top priority for me. And I obtain a lot more joy of life and satisfaction of life in building friends rather than in, building money or career. And that's kind of an odd thing to say, because God's blessed me with a really pretty crazy career, and people would look at my job and say, oh, wow, that's very prestigious. And it is, but it's not what I consider one of the most important things in my life, as opposed to relationships with friends. Years ago, I heard a pastor preach on the verse that says, lay up treasures in heaven, don't lay up treasures on earth. And he said, I can't find a local branch bank at the Bank of Heaven. The only thing I can find here that's going to heaven, that's here, that I can lay up treasures in, are other souls. And so if you invest in other people, that's laying up treasures in heaven. And that's really kind of defined a lot of my motivation. I have a lot of great friends. I love that. I find great pleasure in that. I find great joy in that. David and I have talked about this before. Really, this coming January, we'll have been friends for 45 years. And I think it's not many people who can say, oh, I've had someone that I've called my best friend for almost half a century. I know a lot of people who aren't even in touch with their wedding attendant or their best man. David and I were best man at each other's wedding, and 40-some years later, we still consider ourselves best friend. And that's really one of the great riches in my life. And so whether I made a decision to work less at the law firm and focus on other things, whether I made a decision to spend my money in relationships and situations where, just for whatever coincidental reason, I happened to have more money than the other person did, it wasn't significant or important. That was just a way I could use it to feed the relationship. My life hack, which is a phrase I would never use. That must be a generational thing, Michael. My life hack would be that I have found great joy in relationships. And these aren't just relationships, they're relationships centered around Jesus. That's been the most fulfilling thing in my life.
Yeah, since that's like totally foreign to me, you want to define life hacks for me?
Yeah. So a life hack for me has been that I outsource my laundry now. I don't do my own laundry. I pay to have it done. But it frees up so much stress out of my life because I don't have to worry about, getting the kids' socks matched up, moving it from the washer to the dryer, folding it, putting it. I just throw it in a bag. And my buddy over at the dry cleaner, they pick it up, take care of all that, and bring it back. It's like magic.
Wonderful.
I choose to spend my energy in different ways when I have free time. So that's a way that it's, for me, money very well spent to increase the quality of life.
And I see your generation making those kinds of decisions, probably much more than my generation. Even people in my generation who have more money, we tend to be more sort of duty bound and do things. And I don't know that that's right or wrong, but certainly I see that your generation is freer to say, let's outsource things that I can easily outsource and enjoy the time that I have. Just interesting.
You only get so much free time. And I like to invest it with my kids and in, other social activities, and laundry is very far down the list for me.
And because I love relationships so much, and we've kind of talked about this, when I'm traveling with work, I tend to incorporate into that relationship things. I often travel with my family. We'll go somewhere kind of interesting for a meeting, and I may stay an extra day or so. But again, while I'm in meetings, they may be out doing things, but I've got the evening to spend with them. As I said, David and I have done that several times. I've been traveling for work, and he's gone with me, and we'll spend the evenings together where he writes during the day. So I've tried to really mix and match a lot, work and pleasure or personal life, kind of work them in seamlessly and use them both as much as I can.
As you define life hacks, I'm again a terrible example. Yeah, I mean, really, I'm like this compulsive workaholic sort of a thing in terms of it's. I just jump in and I go and I go and I go and I keep going.
It's our generation.
Well, maybe an observed one. You tend to work a lot. Your house is literally connected to your office.
It is. There's no.
It's not in your house. They're literally physically connected.
Yeah, I always joke. My commute was really tough today. Last winter when it was like 0 degrees or 10 below, I said, "Boy, my commute was really tough walking through the hallway across to the meeting room today." I mean, it's obviously it's all together, and we have that. The only thing that I can think of that actually fits that, because I'm consumed in my life, would be people. And I've done jobs that theoretically I shouldn't be able to do. But I try to find the right people who are people that I can trust. I sow into that. I let them know principles. I let them know who I am, how I think, and then I set them free. I set them free. If you've got the right person, you've got integrity, and you set them free. It's amazing how often they just will really take off and go and begin to do things in amazing ways. And over through the years, I'm doing jobs that you shouldn't be able to do, because I can walk back in and so will say, "Oh, I did this, this, and this, and I made this decision on your behalf." And the vast majority of the time, I'm able to say, "Excellent," and just keep right on going. Because if you really know your people, you turn them loose to be hopefully themselves if you've put them in the right spot. And you've got this freedom at that point to take off and go and grow. And right now, my daughter-in-law, who is one who you would never think in terms of when she first came in, to work with me, it was like, okay, this isn't going to be that kind of a relationship, but it is. And I can start naming different people, the assistant director of the program. When you invest in people that way and turn them loose, it's just amazing how that all works. And then the loyalty they have, the value they're getting out of that. Because my life is so consumed with what I do and its mission, and it's my fun and it's everything, you better have some good people in your world. And that's probably the best answer I can give you.
Yeah, we have meetings internally here, and I might block out an hour for it, and then we feel really silly when it was about a 10-minute meeting because it was a really simple issue, and Dayton had done just such a great job already working through it. He really just wanted my blessing on it and said, "Okay, yeah, sounds great." Second opinion. It's really nice when it works that way, huh?
It is amazing. And one other thing I would add to that I love about my life at this point. I mean, Eric and I was with a pastor a week ago who had been my youth pastor, 25 years ago. I love when you have quality relationships, especially in Christ, and you develop that. It's like you can go for a year without talking to someone just because at this point I've worked with so many different people. You can't maintain that closeness with the numbers of people that I've interacted with through all the years. It's just physically impossible. But I love being able to step back into that world and pick up the relationship as if no time went by. And I have so many of those kinds of relationships where you've built that loyalty, you've built that connection, you've had that interaction, and it's like you get the chance and you can pick that thing back up, and it's just an amazing world to live that way.
As you two have both, grown older over time.
Be careful.
Not a lot older.
Be careful.
I'm denying that.
Just a little bit.
Denial's not just a river in Egypt.
What have you realized is less important than you thought it was over time?
Me?
Good answer.
I mean, in my early years, two things. Number one, I felt like it all depended on me, and really stressed so much about myself. And then the second thing, in people that I'm working with, I used to believe I had the power to influence them. I used to believe I had the power to make changes, etc. So then I would go to bed at night with all of that stress on me. Mm-hmm. And one of the most powerful things that I did was when I realized I only have as much authority or as much influence in another person's life as they choose to give me. And somewhere in there, when that really hit home, and I stopped taking myself so seriously, I mean, that's probably the most significant change that's happened in my life.
This is probably a variation on David's answer, but my answer would be control. I always went to be in control of everything, and I'm still learning to give that up. I shared the example earlier of going from God as my co-pilot to me just crawling in the back seat and letting him fly the plane without my quote-unquote help. I've long had this habit or this pattern of making long-range plans for my life. And I figured out years ago that God was graciously letting me make those plans. He was just doing something completely different. So he was saying, you want to make this plan? Sure, go ahead, knock yourself out, buddy. But that's not at all what happened. And what happened was always better than what I had planned to do. And so I'm just really learning and still learning to take my hands off the imaginary steering wheel of control and to think that I'm in control of what's going on, and really just to sit back and see what God's doing in my life, because it's always better than I could have planned. It's always amazing what he does. And it really works better if I just get myself out of the way and let him do that. So I would say my sense of control I'm learning is much less important than I certainly thought it was.
Nice. One thing that's becoming really apparent is this is probably the most spiritual podcast we've had so far.
Well, you knew what you were getting with me.
Yeah, you did. Right.
I mean,
you know us both well.
I
Right.
do retreats, et cetera, and frankly, that kind of goes back to a previous question when you were talking about life hacks. And I was just kind of like, okay, what does he even mean by that? And that's my life. That's my joy. Give me a chance to be intense, and intensely spiritual, and really put it out there on the line. And yeah, I definitely will go for it.
Yeah, you freak some people out too.
Occasionally, I do freak people out. There is no doubt about that.
No doubt about that. He does freak people out.
Maybe this is one we can end on. What's way more important today than you ever thought it was?
I'm going to go back to just simple obedience, one day at a time, the small stuff. We were on the East Coast doing some ministry, and we came home, and my wife was, hey, how about if we have the kids over, kids, grandkids? And, I mean, we were up at whatever, equivalent of 2 a.m. and flew back and actually had a meeting with you that afternoon. And then I come home and it's kind of like, I'm going to be exhausted. But keeping those priorities, coming back, I'd been gone a little bit. It could have been easy for me to have jumped in. There were a number of work, quote, emergencies, et cetera. But just having those priorities in order and just hanging out with the right people, the right way, the right time, man, that's so, so huge.
You've already talked about this podcast becoming very spiritual, so I'm going to double down on that. And I've talked about how important relationships are to me, and they've always been important to me, and I've always treasured them a lot. What I'm coming to realize more than I really had until just really the last several years is the vertical relationship. Because I've always had this view, it's probably my German upbringing and my German heritage. You've got to do things. And so because I've always been committed to my faith, I always had this list of, I have to do things for God. God really needs my help. And if I'm doing well, God's really lucky to have me. I mean, I would never say that, but that's the way I acted. And I've come to realize that all he really wants from me, in a sense, is what David and I have with each other. And that's just a friendship to hang out together. I mean, David kind of made a comment earlier about some of the things he said that I've done for him in the relationship. And I commented on how much I valued his relationship. But primarily, I would define our relationship as just two guys who enjoy hanging out with each other. And I'm increasingly convinced that that's, to put it in a very simple phrase, what Jesus wants from me. He doesn't want me to be doing a lot of stuff for me. There's a great verse in John that says, the work of God is to believe in the one who he sent. Not to do all this stuff, just to believe in the one that God sent, that one being, of course, Jesus. And so just to be with him and not think I have to achieve things, do things, accomplish things, I'm slowly coming to realize it's far more important than I did before.
Wow. Thank you so much for all the comments on relationship from, of course, authority, at least in the courtroom, and certainly here on relationship. And,
Actually, I'm going to jump in there when you talk about authority, just watching Eric, and you get this seat, watching him with especially younger men and sowing into them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, If I was to use the word authority, I wouldn't talk about his job. I would talk about the way he sows into people and the way he sows into lives. I mean, it's an amazing example, and I know people don't see that the way I see that, but that's a powerful life testimony.
That's a great catch.
Thank you.
Actually, I was really underselling that part. So, but yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing about quality of life through relationship, because very few people can talk about 45 years of great friendship, companionship. And
I'm incredibly blessed, I think, just richly blessed to have that. I feel very grateful.
Absolutely. And I got to experience some of that and learn more of it the first time we did a retreat about a year ago. Just to experience more up close personal. But anyways, thanks guys so much for coming on, and we're going to call it a wrap for the Real Wealth Podcast.